The day after I divorced Charlie, I committed suicide. I lay on the ground, blood staining the ground. It was rumored that the eldest daughter of Amy's family was a lovesick person, and after the divorce she committed suicide holding Charlie's photo. But only Charlie knew that the photo of the love suicide I was holding was not of him, but of his twin brother Kevin. After I died, Charlie, who had never loved me, went crazy and hugged my body and said he loved me. I committed suicide to find relief. But I didn't expect that I wouldn't be able to rest in peace even after becoming a ghost. At this moment, I have turned into a ghost, sitting next to my own corpse, being interrogated by the underworld police. Suicide is a capital crime in the underworld. You cannot be reincarnated immediately, did you know that? They took a large book with a gorgeous cover, flipped through it, and then said to me. Different from the traditional impression of the black and white impermanents with green faces and fangs, these two young policemen in the underworld are wearing all black uniforms and are quite handsome. I stared at their faces in a daze. They noticed that I was in a daze and tapped the cover of their notebooks with the pens in their hands. Only then did I come back to my senses. I cut my wrists to commit suicide, blood was all over my hands, I rubbed my clothes, then raised my head and said. I don't know. This is my first time dying and I have no experience. The underworld policeman sighed helplessly and explained to me, who had no experience with death for the first time. People are controlled by people, and ghosts are controlled by ghosts. In our law, suicide is a serious crime, because human life is not easy to come by. If you don't cherish your life, you need to be tried in the city of wrongful death. You need to give a reasonable reason for suicide, otherwise you will be sentenced to a heavy punishment. If you can't atone for your sins, you can't reincarnate. It's so troublesome, can I not die? I was overwhelmed when I heard it. I looked at my body lying in a pool of blood. It was already lifeless. The policeman's face turned pale. Nonsense. Do you think you can come and go to the underworld as you please? They ignored my struggles and took me to the so-called court of the city of the dead, where I began to be interrogated by the leader on the main seat. People who commit suicide are often full of resentment towards the world. Ghosts with too much resentment and evil spirits also have strong obsessions. Such ghosts cannot be liberated and are full of evil spirits. They are not qualified to enter the underworld reincarnation. You have to give me 3 reasonable explanations for your suicide, otherwise you will become a lonely ghost and will never be liberated until you turn to ashes. A reason to commit suicide? My thoughts were pulled back to a long time ago. The first time I had suicidal thoughts was probably when Charlie asked me for a divorce. Charlie and I tortured each other for 7 years. He was plagued by scandals and paraded around town with one young model and female star after another. I stayed at home as a good wife, helping him resolve one scandal after another and saving Charlie's family's precarious stock market. I love Charlie without dignity, and everyone in City A can make fun of me. But I never take it seriously. Until he filed for divorce from me. That night, after he was satisfied, he got up from me, turned his back to me and put on his clothes, and said something lightly. Let's get divorced. I paused as I was grabbing my pajamas, thinking I had misheard, and asked, what? He buttoned his shirt and turned back with an indifferent expression, patiently repeating his words. She is ready to come back, so let's hurry up and find a day to get the divorce certificate. I went through a lot of trouble to get you married, but he could decide on divorce with just a few words. The girl he was referring to was his first love, Jane, whom he had loved for 10 years but could never get. If Charlie asks for a divorce, I naturally won't agree. But there is nothing Charlie can't do if he wants to. Even though I was extremely reluctant, he still dragged me to register for a divorce. After a 1-month cool-off period, my marriage with him will be completely dissolved. It was raining that day and I didn't bring an umbrella. I looked up at him with tears in my eyes. Do we really have to do this? Charlie's beautiful eyes were filled with disgust towards me. Amy, when you forced me to get married, you should have thought that this day would come. After he said that, he turned around and got into his Maybach. The driver looked at me with an umbrella, thinking that it was raining heavily and wanted to take me with him. Charlie, however, had a stern face and sat in the back seat and said coldly, "Are you the driver of Charlie's family or the driver of Amy's family?" The driver was frightened and didn't dare to call me. After hesitating for a long time, he trotted over and handed me the umbrella in his hand. "Madam, please be careful when you go back." The driver ran back, sat in the driver's seat and drove away. From beginning to end, Charlie never looked at me again. This driver used to pick me up and drop me off often, and I would often give him some snacks that I made myself, so we became familiar with each other after a few visits. After 4 years of marriage, the drivers from Charlie's family are always close to me. But I gave everything I had from the age of 20 to 27, but I still couldn't melt the iceberg that was Charlie. Charlie has loved Jane for 9 years, and I have loved Charlie for 12 years. When I was 15, Charlie and I were admitted to the same high school. Like a stink bug in a ditch, I watched Charlie silently in the dark. When I was 20, Charlie's family ran into financial problems. I showed up with hundreds of millions of dollars in assets to help his family overcome the difficulties, but the prerequisite was that he had to marry me. Both my parents have passed away, but I am the only one who has inherited hundreds of millions of dollars in assets. I have a top-notch appearance and academic qualifications, and the elders in Charlie's family are very satisfied with me. Just like that, I became Charlie's fiancé. Although the elders in Charlie's family were very kind to me, Charlie still had many complaints and warned me many times that he only had Jane in his heart. But I still went forward happily. If Charlie said east, I would never go west. If Charlie wanted to hit someone, I would definitely prepare boxing gloves for him to prevent his hands from getting injured. Whenever Charlie goes on a date with Jane and it rains and he doesn't bring an umbrella, I will rush over to bring him an umbrella. Later, Charlie's family forced Charlie to change his mind, and Jane also used Charlie's family's money to study abroad. Only then did Charlie marry me under pressure from all sides. After we got married, he became completely self-indulgent, with constant scandals, and he treated me so coldly that we barely saw each other for several months. I had always thought that he would change his mind sooner or later, but I didn't expect that in the 4th year of my marriage, Charlie's mother passed away, Charlie's father was seriously ill, Jane was going back to the country, and Charlie, who was in charge of the Charlie family, would kick me away. After registering for divorce, Charlie never returned home again. I found Charlie's family's old house. Charlie's father, who was bedridden, held my hand, tears in his eyes, and said sorry to me. When Charlie's father was in power, Charlie was still rebellious, not to mention that Charlie's father is now bedridden, so I don't blame Charlie's father. Charlie wanted to hide, and I couldn't find any trace of him in the entire city of A. All calls to him were hung up and blocked. Just when I was at a loss, I received calls from some of Charlie's close friends. He said Charlie was getting drunk at the club and asked me to pick him up. Late at night in early autumn, the golden leaves of the sycamore trees on the street looked bleak under the illumination of the street lights. When I ran to the club according to the location Charlie's friend sent me, it was still raining outside. I was in a hurry to leave the house and didn't bring an umbrella. When I ran into the box, my hair was already wet by the sudden rainstorm, and strands of it stuck to my skin. But when I went in, I didn't see the scene that those people told me about, where Charlie was drunk and needed someone to pick him up. What greeted me was a group of men and women wearing designer clothes and well-dressed, sitting on the sofa, waiting to laugh at me. After they saw how miserable I was, there was a burst of cheers in the huge box. I laughed. I said she could get here within half an hour. I win, you all drink. The person who said this was a good friend of Charlie's who he had known for many years. When I forced Charlie to marry me, everyone was betting on who would win in the end, me or Jane, and he bet all his fortune on Jane. Charlie sat next to him with a calm expression and a faint smile on his lips. He was the one who allowed these things to happen. The box was in chaos. The winners cheered and the losers were dejected and rolled their eyes at me. Wasn't she the eldest daughter of the Amy family group before? How come she has no bottom line now? They only cared about winning or losing, and didn't care about me standing at the door in an embarrassed and undignified manner. I looked through the crowd and saw Charlie sitting on the sofa. He glanced at me lazily, declaring his victory. I took the dry towel handed to me by the waiter and walked in front of Charlie, pretending not to hear the malicious discussions around me. I gave him what I thought was the sweetest smile. I'm glad you're okay. Charlie's eyebrows twitched and he looked at me with disgust. Amy, don't you have any dignity? The surroundings became quiet, and everyone was waiting to see the show. Facing his ridicule, I still smiled politely. If you are fine, I will go back first. My phone is not silent, you can call me anytime if you need me. I smiled at the people around me again. I'm very sorry to disturb your mood. I turned and left, shutting out the discussions behind me in the box. That day I was waiting for Charlie in the club lobby, wanting to make things clear with him. The club's manager knew me and wanted to take me to the lounge to wait, but I was afraid of missing Charlie, so I refused. But I waited until midnight and Charlie showed no sign of coming out. I was caught in the rain. I had not had a good rest these days because of the internal friction of the divorce. I fainted when the cold wind blew in the hall. When I woke up again, I was already in the hospital. Sleeping next to him was Charlie's cousin Cindy. Cindy is the daughter of Aunt Charlie. She is a pampered young lady from a wealthy family. She does not need to fight for inheritance rights. She can get millions of pocket money from her elders just by acting coquettishly. Naturally, she is brought up to be very simple and kind. She hated Jane, so she became my ally. I wanted to reach out and pour myself a glass of water, but I woke her up. After she woke up, she yawned, "Amy, you finally woke up. I was scared to death. I just came out of the club with my friends, and I saw you lying on the ground, and the club manager was calling 120. As she spoke, she poured me a cup of hot water and then reached out to touch my forehead. Fortunately, the fever has gone away. I took 2 sips of water before asking, "Where is Charlie?" Cindy knew her cousin's character and slapped the quilt in indignation. "Don't work for him. I get angry when I mention him. After sending you to the hospital, the club manager told me that he was also in the club. I called him and told him that you fainted, but he told me not to play the victimization strategy. It really pissed me off." Cindy was indignant on my behalf, but I lowered my eyes and stared blankly at the water cup in my hand. As expected of Charlie, once he sets his mind to doing something, he will do it to the extreme. It's also my fault that when I was forcing him to marry me, I did everything I could, including crying, making a fuss, and even hanging myself, just to get him to marry me. Now his evil deeds have been punished, and there is nothing I can do to keep him. Cindy didn't give up and called Charlie again, this time in front of me and on speakerphone. As soon as the phone was connected, Cindy said, "My sister-in-law and I are in the hospital now. She is really sick and very weak. No matter what, you must come and see her." Unexpectedly, Charlie on the other side paused for a few seconds, chuckled softly, and his tone was full of sarcasm. "Didn't she pretend to be sick often enough? You were young and naively helped her. She and I are divorced now. If you have any questions, please talk to my assistant. Don't let her contact me directly. I'm afraid Jane will misunderstand." "Jane?" Cindy was furious. "She came back? She took so much money from her aunt, how could she have the nerve to come back?" Cindy hated Jane and couldn't help but raise her voice when she heard her name. But Charlie said sternly, "If she wants to come back, I will let her come back. Oh, by the way, please tell Amy not to disturb Jane, otherwise I will not let her go." Charlie said this because I had a criminal record. Before we got married, before Charlie's mother took action, I went to find Jane and begged her to give Charlie to me. At that time, I burst into tears and begged her, saying, "I can't live without Charlie." She sat on the sofa and looked at me arrogantly and coldly. "If you want me to give up Charlie, then kneel down and beg me." I knelt down. But Jane didn't keep her word. She crossed her legs and started to mock me with a victorious attitude. I laughed. "You are the eldest daughter of Amy's family. People say you are a noble and cool goddess. Why did you do that for Charlie? Like a dog." Unlike everyone's impression of a gentle and elegant first love, Jane was born in poverty and was a little gangster in high school. She also has a weak mother and a gambling-addicted father, which is simply the standard configuration of the heroine in a youth romance novel. I heard that Charlie fell in love with her at first sight because he saw her fighting 3 girls alone, just to save a little kitten. Charlie loved Jane to his core, so when he knew I was going to see Jane, he came straight to me. She angrily knocked over the dessert I offered her with a smile and said to me, "Didn't I warn you not to go look for Jane?" I like that about Charlie. Jane didn't understand, Charlie's family didn't understand, and even Charlie didn't understand. To outsiders, my mother was a very popular actress when she was young, and my stepfather is the president of the Amy family with a net worth of over 100 million. My stepfather was a fan of my mom when she was young. After my mom got married, he gave all his love to me and my mom. After they passed away one after another, I inherited all the property of Amy's family. I have the best beauty and family background, but because I love Charlie, I let people trample on my self-esteem at will. Cindy didn't understand either, so she followed me out of the hospital and went home with me. She was puzzled to see that there was not much trace of Charlie's life in the house I shared. "Amy, I really don't understand. You are beautiful, smart and rich. Why would you like my cousin, that jerk? If you like him, then you like him, but since he treated you like that, aren't you angry at all?" The recollection ended, and I looked up at the person who was interrogating me on the main seat. He lowered his voice. "Love problems can be considered a reason, but there are many beautiful things in life, so there is no need to commit suicide." I laughed at myself. What if other good things have been destroyed long ago? Why do I like Charlie so much? This is the second reason why I want to commit suicide. To outsiders, I have a happy family. A beautiful mother, a wealthy stepfather, and a happy and harmonious family. But what if all this is fake? I followed my mother to marry Amy when I was 10 years old, and changed my last name to Amy following my stepfather. My biological father was also a wealthy businessman, but his business failed when I was just in elementary school. He committed suicide by jumping off a building, leaving behind a huge debt for my mother, who had never done any housework, to bear. My grand piano was moved away, and my mother and I were forced to move from the big house to a rental house. The mother who had already quit the entertainment industry and became a wealthy wife could only re-enter the entertainment industry and play roles such as vicious mother-in-law. Not only was she mocked by newcomers in the entertainment industry, but she also had to endure harassment from debt collectors when she got home. My mother, who was always gentle and graceful, was tortured to the point of changing her temperament. She became hysterical in front of me many times. With debt collectors coming to my house from time to time, I spent most of my childhood hiding in the closet, the only place where I could. It can give me some sense of security when I was little. This kind of restless life of hiding lasted for 3 years, until my stepfather appeared and married my mother home without any grudges. My mother started living the life of a wealthy lady again, and thanks to her stepfather's connections, she starred in a big IP movie. She won the Best Actress award, which was the last gold medal in her acting career. If the story ended here, it would be a perfect ending. But life doesn't always go as planned. Even though I was only in my early teens at that time, I could feel many times that my stepfather was too enthusiastic and caring towards me. And it turns out that my feeling was not wrong. One night when I was 12, my stepfather took advantage of my mother's business trip, sneaked into my room in the dark, and put his hand under my quilt. I was still asleep when I was awakened, but he covered my mouth, pressed on me, and tore my nightgown into pieces. That night was the nightmare I dare not recall in my life. The stepfather said, "I was the one who saved you and your daughter. If it weren't for me, you would still be hiding. This is how you should repay me." I waited for my mother to come back from outside and told her about it. After hearing this, she went into her stepfather's study. She was furious when she entered, but came out in tears. She hugged me and cried all night. The next day she said to me, "Amy, Mom will take you to buy a new nightgown." I looked into her tear-red eyes, trying to find what I wanted to see, but I couldn't find it. At the age of 12, I knew that between a comfortable life and me, my mother gave up on me. When I was violated again, my mother was on the first floor, turning on her favorite piano music and dancing her favorite waltz barefoot on the marble floor. She danced non-stop with graceful steps and light movements. My crying and screaming on the second floor never stopped since the dance music started. My life was ruined under my mother's gorgeous dance skirt. I became more and more withdrawn, like a beautiful soulless doll. I don't fit in with my friends around me. I have no friends, no family, and no home. I live like a puppet every day. Occasionally, I feel like someone is calling me from behind, but when I turn around, there is only the raging wind. I met Charlie during the darkest time of my life. Climbing back up from the bottom, my mother began to show off her luxury cars, mansions, and valuable jewelry on various social media platforms. A tall tree attracts the wind, and I have always been a loner, so one day when I was in the 3rd year of junior high school, I was kidnapped on my way home. I was tied up in an abandoned warehouse with a pig farm next to it. It was smelly, but I felt a rare sense of security. I even thought it would be better to die like this. The day after I was kidnapped, when the masked kidnapper brought me food, he also threw in a boy about my age. I recognized the school uniform he was wearing. It was from another aristocratic school. My goodness, these kidnappers are really desperate criminals. They kidnap 2 people at a time and do it in bulk. I was tied up for 2 days, but because I was very well behaved and did not resist or scream, and the warehouse was well enclosed, with no windows or passages, and only the big iron door to escape, they simply stopped tying me up. But the boy on the ground was tied up like a Dragon Boat Festival rice dumpling, with a large piece of cloth stuffed in his mouth. Even so, he was still not obedient and kept fiddling with it, trying to break free. I felt annoyed when I saw this, so I walked over, pulled out the cloth that was stuffing his mouth, and said angrily, "Can you please be quiet?" The boy on the ground was stunned and had an incredible expression on his face. "Oh my God, it turns out you are neither dumb nor stupid. I thought you couldn't speak." I rolled my eyes and picked up the stone next to me. "I'm not a fool, but I can beat you into a fool." In the following time, he kept muttering in my ear. I got annoyed and blocked his mouth with a cloth again. There is a school badge on his school uniform with his name, Charlie. He had never been well behaved since he came in, and only after being kicked several times by the kidnappers who delivered food did he behave himself a little. He was tied up and was very puzzled when he saw me moving freely in the warehouse. "You can't be one of them, otherwise why don't you run away?" I was sitting in the corner, looking at the finger width of sunlight coming in from above the warehouse, with tiny golden dust particles flying in it. "Why run? I took a bite of the bun and didn't see any meat filling. I took another bite and still didn't see any meat filling. I simply broke the meat bun open. The bun was as big as a fist, and the meat filling was not even as big as the tip of my little finger. I simply broke open the remaining meat buns, kept the meat filling for myself, and handed the bun skins to him. He was angry, but still opened his mouth and bit the bun skin I gave him. After eating the bun skins for 2 days, he finally couldn't stand it anymore and started to coax the kidnappers with sweet words, saying that he was the eldest son of Charlie's family. There is a huge fortune waiting for him to inherit when he returns. If Charlie's family knew that he was abused, the ransom would definitely be much less. The kidnappers then let him go. After being released, he started to act dishonestly again and began to try to find a way out. And I just sat in the corner and watched him. My attitude towards him changed after the kidnapper brought us food. He had evil intentions towards me. Dragged me to a corner and ripped off my clothes. I just lay there, motionless, without any intention of resisting. Charlie, who was tied up by the kidnappers, broke free like a madman, regardless of his own blood and flesh, and pounced on the robbers to bite them until he was beaten all over. I was rescued, but he was lying on the ground, covered in wounds. I lay next to him, my clothes untied, and looked at him with my chin in my hand. Actually, you don't have to help me. Is it worth it to get beaten like this? My breasts were exposed and the little boy's ears blushed. He looked away, endured the pain and took off his coat and put it on me. He said, "It's worth it." Later, he took the initiative to talk to me. He said, "I don't know what you have encountered, but you are actually waiting for someone to help you." I stayed in that warehouse with him for 10 days. He was like a little son, letting me let down my guard little by little. Finally, he slowly told her about his experience. That night, the moonlight poured in through the gap as wide as a finger. I reached out to catch it, and the moonlight flowed away through my fingers. I said, "So, for an underage girl who doesn't even have her chastity, is there any point for her to live?" He passed by, and the finger width of moonlight shone on his amber eyes. He said, "If your things were stolen, would people scold you? They scolded you as a thief. Why were you forced? Do you think you are the one who made the mistake?" In that dark warehouse, the 15-year-old boy was like a little sun, illuminating the darkest part of my heart. He and I were locked up in the warehouse for almost half a month, with no news from the outside world. We could only find a way out of the warehouse on our own. We relied on the sun to determine the direction and relied on the water of the wild fruit stream to walk dozens of kilometers from the deep mountains to the side of the road. The day we returned to the city, we were on the news. Charlie, the only son of Charlie's family, and Amy's eldest daughter were kidnapped for half a month and they outsmarted the robbers and escaped. He and I no longer looked human. We let the people who came to help us load us into the ambulance, under the flashing lights of the media. He held my hand and said to me with all his strength, "I will share the responsibility with you. I know his name is Charlie, and I know he is the only son in the Charlie family." So after taking a summer break, I enrolled in the same high school as him. However, that little sun-like boy no longer recognized me. He and I were not in the same class. After school started, I found his name on the class list and went to find him with my newly issued books. The same boy, the same face, but the look in his eyes when he looked at me through the crowd seemed so strange. I originally thought that he was just deceiving me in the warehouse, but after I came out, he thought I was dirty and refused to acknowledge me. But not long after, I overheard someone talking in the bathroom, saying that Charlie had lost his memory and had no memory of what happened when he was kidnapped. I was relieved. My boy didn't mean to deny me, but he just lost his memory. So I always stayed by his side, watching him from afar and loving him from afar. I didn't have the courage to confess to him again, but because of Charlie's appearance, I began to learn to resist. But I was still too weak to trip my stepfather all at once, so I kept waiting for the right time. Until, on the eve of my 18th birthday, my stepfather asked my mother to go shopping on my birthday. My mother and I both understood what he meant. My mother tried to resist, but was severely beaten by my stepfather. In the end, she had no choice but to go shopping on my birthday with injuries. That night, my stepfather asked me to change into the skirt he had prepared for me and sit in front of the birthday cake. He said, "Congratulations to our Amy on turning 18. As the candlelight flickered, I smiled and said, "I will usher in my new life." I blew out the birthday candles, a gust of wind blew, and my stepfather had an asthma attack and fell to the ground in pain. And I had hidden all the medicine he could get. I watched him struggle in front of me and then slowly die, and I felt a sense of relief. My method of committing the crime was very crude. I just put the pollen that he was allergic to on the flowers. The first person to discover it was my stepfather's assistant. When he arrived, I was eating cake with an expressionless face, and at my feet was my stepfather, who had already died. As my stepfather's assistant, he knew what I was going through, but he just watched. He said, "Give me a chance to atone for my sins." Therefore, the stepfather's suicide was disguised as an accidental death by the assistant. After learning that my stepfather had died, my mother probably felt guilty towards me, so she jumped from the third floor of the villa and died. Everyone said that my mother was deeply in love and committed suicide with my stepfather. With the help of my assistant, I got all of my stepfather's property. On the day of the funeral, I dressed up and attended my mother and stepfather's funeral. Then my new life began. The first thing I did was go find Charlie. But what I saw was Charlie pushing Jane into the alley and forcefully kissing her. Until he was 20, Charlie's family ran into financial problems. I couldn't bear to see the light in that young boy go out. I finally plucked up the courage and appeared in front of him, using Amy's family assets as a backing. This is the second reason why I want to commit suicide. I, who had already turned into a ghost, told the judge of the city of the dead about my experiences in a casual manner. I thought I had let it go, but my vision blurred, and when I wiped my face with the back of my hand, I found that I was already in tears. The judge sat on the high platform, expressionless, but silently gave me a tick. The second reason is valid. He thought he was saved, but in fact he was in another abyss. The third reason why I committed suicide. Cindy told me. That night we had some wine and talked about our inner thoughts on the terrace while looking at the stars. Cindy held up her phone to show me Jane's Facebook, where she showed off a large number of luxury goods. It must have been bought by my cousin. Even before the divorce was officially finalized, Charlie was already busy trying to show his affection to his ex-girlfriend. I feel sad, but I can't do anything about it. I asked her why she hated Jane. She put her feet on the sofa, holding the bottle of red wine and drinking it from it. She drank the red wine that cost $30,000 a bottle as if it were Tsingtao beer. She said angrily, "Jane is a bitch. She and I were in the same club at the beginning. I liked a senior and she knew about it. Not long after, she got together with that senior. I was very sad for a while. After getting a little tipsy, I also became sentimental. You can't hate her just because the senior likes her, that's too petty, and not the style of a young lady." Cindy was so angry that her teeth itched. If it was just because of this, I wouldn't have hated her for so many years. Later I found out that the senior fell in love with Jane because he thought Jane was his game friend. Asshole, the senior's game friend was me. When I was in the third year of high school, my parents didn't allow me to play games and canceled my account. Then Jane saw my diary and found out about my game account. She also found out that the person the senior liked was his game friend, so they got together. Looking at it this way, it is indeed very unfair. The reason why I thought of Charlie liking Jane was when I saw Jane fighting off 3 people who were abusing cats in the alley. Just imagine how ugly Charlie would be if Jane was also impersonating someone else. When I thought about it, I couldn't help laughing. Cindy sat down next to me drunkenly and rested her head on my shoulder. "What about you? I'm curious why you like this bastard Charlie so much." Cindy is usually not afraid of anything except Charlie, but after getting drunk she becomes bolder and dares to call him by his full name. I looked up at the stars in the night sky, and thought of the amber eyes of the boy in the moonlight many years ago. I let down my guard around Cindy and told her everything that had happened to me over the years. Finally I said to Cindy, "Many people think that I have everything and it is not worth it to give up my self-esteem for Charlie. But only I know that if it weren't for him, I don't know where I would be now, and I don't know whether I would be dead or alive. Dignity? That thing is not important." From that time on, every moment of my life was to be close to him. But when I finished saying this, Cindy paused. She was stunned for a long time, and suddenly slapped her thigh. "Not Charlie." I was still looking up at the night sky. "What's not Charlie?" Cindy suddenly said seriously, "The person you like may not be Charlie, because there are 2 Charlies in our Charlie family." I had liked Charlie for 12 years before I found out about him from Cindy. The Charlie I love is not actually Charlie. According to what Cindy said, Charlie is actually not Charlie's mother's biological child. He is Charlie's father's illegitimate child. He has a twin brother named Kevin. Charlie's mother was kind-hearted. After knowing the existence of Charlie and Kevin, she did not say anything. Because she was infertile, she adopted Charlie and announced to the public that he was her own child, the only son in Charlie's family. Charlie also didn't know that he was an illegitimate child. Charlie and Kevin's biological mother concealed the fact that Charlie was a twin, just to return to Charlie's family to fight for the property after Kevin grows up. But accidents never happen. Charlie's biological mother died in an accident when Charlie was a teenager. Kevin lived with his grandmother all by himself, but when he was 15, his grandmother became seriously ill and he had nowhere else to turn. He accidentally found his mother's diary and discovered that he had a younger brother in Charlie's family. In order to pay for his grandmother's medical expenses, he had no choice but to come to Charlie's family. Charlie didn't reject his brother at first. Kevin was smart, likable, and didn't have any of his biological mother's scheming. After discussing with Charlie's father, Charlie's mother decided to let Kevin stay in Charlie's family as well. But the sudden appearance of a 15-year-old child would be big news, so Kevin has been living with Charlie's family while Charlie's father and mother were preparing. 2 identical children. When Charlie doesn't want to go to class, Kevin will wear Charlie's school uniform and go to school for him. But one day an accident happened and Kevin was kidnapped. The original plan also fell through. Later, Kevin insisted on going back to take care of his grandmother, and only people within Charlie's family knew that there were 2 Charlies. So, the Charlie I love is actually Kevin. So, it's not because he lost his memory that he couldn't recognize me. That night, Cindy was sleeping soundly on the sofa, but I became more and more sober the more I drank. The next day I contacted a private detective and found the housekeeper who had been in Charlie's family for more than 10 years. Charlie had the habit of writing a diary when he was a teenager, but I never dared to read it before because I was afraid that it would be filled with evidence of his love for Jane. But at this moment, I broke into his study, found his diary from his teenage years, and read it word by word, looking for any news about Kevin. I was surprisingly quiet while I was processing this. There was no emotional breakdown, nor was there any panic. He made arrangements in an orderly manner and looked for clues in the diary. Finally, I was able to confirm the information and find the address of Kevin's grandmother's house. The day I left, Cindy sent me a message. My cousin bought a plane ticket today. I wonder if he is going to go find that little bitch. After Cindy woke up, she forgot what she had told me about Kevin. At this time, I was also on a plane to Kevin's grandmother's hometown. When I arrived, I discovered that the 2-story flat of Kevin's grandmother's house that I had found with great difficulty had been abandoned. The iron gate of the yard was rusty and the yard was overgrown with weeds. Seeing me looking at the door, an aunt next to me came over and asked me, "Girl, are you looking for someone?" I nodded and pointed to the deserted courtyard and said, "I'm looking for the person who lives here, his name is Kevin." The aunt looked me up and down with a strange expression. "Who are you to him?" I paused, searching my mind for a suitable word, and finally could only say, "He is my lifesaver." Unexpectedly, as soon as I said this, my aunt sighed deeply. What a sin. This child from Charlie's family is so pitiful. I don't know why, but I felt a little uneasy. Later, my aunt gave me an address, and when I got there, what caught my eye was a cemetery. My aunt said that Kevin's grandmother died when he was 17 years old. Kevin lived alone for a year. During the summer vacation when he was admitted to university, he encountered 2 drowning children. He rescued the 2 children, but died in the river. How to describe that feeling? You find out that the person you have loved for 12 years is actually someone else. Before you can digest this mistake, you find out that the person you were supposed to love has passed away. The boy who was like a little son, the boy who said he would share the responsibility with me, has turned into a short grave. I sat alone at Kevin's grave all night. The next day, dew soaked my clothes and hair, and Charlie appeared in front of me. He was holding a bouquet of flowers in his arms, and when he saw me appear in front of Kevin's grave, his eyes were full of disgust. "Amy, you really want to get me by any means you can. Not only do you know that I have a brother, but you also know that today is his death anniversary, and you came to stop me." He pulled me up from Kevin's tombstone, but I was so weak that I fell on him with black eyes. Charlie didn't dodge, but after I stood firm, he immediately took a big step back. "Amy, you really crossed my bottom line this time." I looked up at him, and there was no longer any ripple in my heart. "Isn't your bottom line Jane?" Charlie thought I was deliberately trying to stop him, but I no longer had the energy to share my emotions with him. He wanted to say something else, so I gathered my coat and walked down the mountain. It doesn't matter what Charlie thinks of me anymore. I went back to Kevin's grandmother's house and wanted to take another look at the place where the boy I loved lived. The aunt who showed me the way last time gave me a very old iron box. "I forgot last time, is your name Amy?" I paused. When Kevin and I were kidnapped, I only told him that my name was Amy, and I didn't tell him my last name. After getting my answer, the aunt handed me the iron box in her hand. I found this when I was sorting out Kevin's belongings. It was his diary and some small things, all of which he had treasured in a drawer. I collected them together after I discovered them. I don't know what kind of mood I was in when I returned to City A. I was in a daze and stunned all the way, feeling that everything was unrealistic. I took the iron box back to the house Charlie and I lived in. I dismissed all the servants, sat alone in front of my wedding photo with Charlie, and opened the iron box. The difference between Charlie and Kevin can be seen from the diary books they write in. Charlie's diary is a luxury book with a gold-stamped cover. The notebook Kevin used to write his diary was the cheapest one sold at the stationery store at the school gate, and even the paper was rather rough. But after reading the two people's diaries, my mood is completely different. With trembling hands, I opened Kevin's diary. Kevin started to develop the habit of keeping a diary when he was 11 years old. He has several notebooks, and I read them word by word. I first appeared in Kevin's diary when he was 15, shortly after we were kidnapped. This is how he described me. God knows what kind of magical things have happened to me recently. The kidnapping of a wealthy family actually happened to me. Charlie would encounter such danger. Fortunately, this time I was kidnapped for him. I was tied up for 16 days and lost several pounds. However, I met a very cool girl. I was so scared that my legs were shaking, but she was as calm as a female knight. Later she told me some of her stories, and said that she had experienced many things that other girls had never experienced. But for a female knight, these things will only make her stronger. The heroine's name is Amy. I saw it from her school badge, but she asked me to call her Amy. She seemed to hate the name. Later I escaped with her. We were both poor children, and I wanted to face those things with her. But Charlie's mother said that my existence could not be known to outsiders, so I had to stay in the hospital. I miss my grandma and I also want to find Amy. I wonder how she is doing. After he turned 15, he mentioned me more and more often in his diary. When he was with Charlie's family, he wrote, "I want to go to class for Charlie today, and then go find Amy. I wonder if her injury has healed." When he decided to leave Charlie's family, he wrote, "Charlie's family is not suitable for me, I want to go back to live with my grandmother, but does this mean I won't be able to see Amy in the future?" When he encountered setbacks, he wrote, "Hold on, Kevin. Amy, a girl has persisted in all those things, you can't give up." When he saw others setting off fireworks during the Chinese New Year, he said, "Amy said she set off fireworks when she was a child, but she didn't set off fireworks when she grew up. I wonder if she didn't set off fireworks this year." When his grandmother passed away, the pages of the diary were full of tear marks, but there were only 4 words written in the diary, "Think of Amy." Later, when he was 18 years old, during the summer vacation after the college entrance examination, he came to City A alone, and he came to me first. In his diary, he wrote, "I finally found out that Amy and Charlie were from the same school. After asking a lot of people, I found out that Amy would be reading in the bookstore that day. But when I walked up to her, she just glanced at me and turned away. My dear knight, she didn't recognize me. It's so sad. This is the saddest thing since my grandma passed away. I remember that summer when I killed my stepfather with my own hands. I ran to find Charlie, but saw him kissing Jane. I was so sad that I couldn't deal with it myself, so I shut myself off. And the next time I saw the person I called Charlie was in that bookstore. I saw Charlie walking towards me, I paused, lowered my head, turned around and left the bookstore. My heart felt like someone was holding it tightly, and it hurt so much that I couldn't breathe. It turns out that I have been loving the wrong people all these years. It turns out that the boy has been waiting for me. I almost walked towards you. The bullet I shot in the midsummer when I was 18 years old is now hitting me right between the eyebrows. I was almost able to touch the moon. I fell to the ground, looking at my wedding photo with Charlie, and the face that looked exactly like Kevin's. The boy in my memory overlaps with the present. Obviously, they are so different. How could I make a mistake? How could I admit my mistake? The tears that had long since dried up on my face burst out again, and my heart twitched with pain. With trembling hands, I turned to the last page of the diary, which ended on the day when he returned to his grandmother's house from Charlie's family at the age of 18. After that day, this kind-hearted young man stayed in the river forever. And the last page of his diary was filled with my name. Inside, there was a standard photo of me. I don't have many photos of myself when I was young, and I wouldn't take photos unless it was necessary. I picked up the photo and saw my handwriting on the back. For school honor list only. That was the photo of me in my senior year of high school, when I got the top score in the grade and it was posted on the school honors list. I was in darkness, and was lucky enough to see a ray of light, but light and darkness cannot meet. We briefly crossed paths, and the tide receded at the end. So after sunset, I give my light back to the sun. Thinking without speaking, remembering without forgetting, wanting without seeing, loving without obtaining. I returned home and committed suicide after I got my divorce certificate from Charlie. I didn't want to die as his wife, but luckily the divorce cooling-off period was over in 2 days. I called Charlie one day in advance and made an appointment in the morning. Charlie was very surprised to see that I obeyed him. We agreed to meet at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, and I arrived early to wait. He glanced at me after he got out of the car. "Amy, what tricks are you going to play?" But I took out a large stack of number plates. I came to wait early in the morning, afraid that I would have to wait again after Charlie arrived. I collected all the number tags, and when Charlie was not around, I gave the number tags to people in need. Now as he came, I stood up and walked inside. In just 1 month, my attitude towards him changed completely. Maybe I was too clingy before and now I am starting to distance myself from him, which makes him feel a little uncomfortable. He looked at me in disbelief. "Amy, you are not setting a trap for me." I laughed. What kind of trap could I dig to make Master Charlie jump into? He was speechless. I got the divorce certificate from him and he didn't look very happy. After getting the divorce certificate, he rarely spoke after getting into the car. "Please take my car back, otherwise people will say I am not kind." I shook my head and refused. I got on a taxi. I wanted to drive here myself, but I was in such a bad state these days. It doesn't matter if I die in a car accident, but it would be bad if I hurt innocent passers-by. After returning home, I told everything to my assistant and started preparing for suicide. The assistant saw my arrangement and guessed something, so he asked, "Is it because Charlie divorced you?" I looked at the photo of Kevin in my diary and touched him in the photo with my fingertips. I said, "Because I found out that the person I love is not Charlie." The assistant didn't say anything for a long time, then he said, "I respect your choice. I think you must be very tired, my good girl. Choose a good family in your next life." At this moment, I have turned into a ghost, and sitting in front of me is the judge of the city of the dead. I said, "I committed suicide not because I couldn't get anyone's love, but because the person I loved was no longer with us." Finally, I was forgiven by the judge. The judge said, "You have lived a life of great misery, and suicide is a helpless act. Now that you have passed the stage of the city of wrongful death, you only need to wait 7 days before you can enter the cycle of reincarnation." The very handsome messenger from the underworld said to me, "During these 7 days, you can go anywhere, both in the underworld and on Earth, but you cannot scare people. It's a good opportunity for you to go and see your relatives." He paused, probably thinking that I didn't have many relatives anymore, and said, "You can look around. I really have nothing worth reminiscing about." Before I decided to commit suicide, I called my former stepfather's assistant and asked him to help me deal with Amy's family property. 90% of the money was donated to the Women and Children's Fund. I just hope that other girls don't have to go through the same thing as me. I also asked my assistant to cash out all my shares in Charlie family and donate the proceeds to stray dogs. For the remaining 10%, I asked my assistant to buy the land in Kevin's hometown. I also wrote a timed text message and asked my assistant to buy all the cemeteries around Kevin and bury me alone. I'm about to die, so I plan to splurge a little and give myself a super deluxe cemetery. For the remaining 7 days, I had nowhere to go, so I just stayed beside my body, wondering who would be the first to find me. I envisioned many possibilities. It could be Cindy who came to visit me, or it could be Charlie's family assistant. But I didn't expect it would be Charlie. On the first night after I died, my phone had several missed calls from Charlie. The call didn't go through, so he sent a few more text messages. Still the same as before, with a commanding and threatening tone. "Amy, I don't care what tricks you want to play, but Kevin is a taboo for our entire Charlie family. You've gone too far. Our divorce is a fact. Stop struggling. I don't want that house anymore. I also hope that you can contact a lawyer as soon as possible so that we can divide the property. Don't play hard to get. You know it doesn't work on me." In the middle of the night, he sent me a message out of the blue. "Answer the phone. Pick up your uncle. I died by cutting my wrists. Before I died, I smashed my wedding photo with Charlie and cut my wrist with the shards of glass that framed the photo. I also put a splinter in my chest. Watching yourself die from a third-person perspective is a very strange thing." I couldn't answer Charlie's call, and I never expected that he would come to my house early the next morning. I dismissed everyone in the huge villa. After he drove in, he habitually called out the nanny's name, but no one responded and he looked unhappy. When I entered the house, everything was normal, except that I was not there. He went upstairs calling my name, and then all the sound stopped the moment he opened the door. I didn't expect Charlie to have such an expression. He first stood there in a daze, his pupils trembling, and then his body stiffened. He staggered like a robot and knelt down beside my body. He stretched out his trembling hand to check my breath. He held me in his arms, his voice trembling. Amy, Amy. As the head of Charlie's family, he has always been calm and composed, but at this moment his calmness collapsed like an avalanche. He lifted my wrist and saw the horrific wound. He tried to reach out to pull out the glass shards from my chest, but stopped when he realized what was happening. He hugged me and began to cry heartbreakingly. It's like losing someone you love very much. What I was holding in my arms were Kevin's diary and photos, and Charlie and I's wedding dress had already been torn to pieces by me. Charlie didn't believe that I committed suicide. After calling the police, he hired a private detective and said he wanted to investigate the matter thoroughly. The second person to arrive was Cindy. After I decided to commit suicide, I sent her a farewell text message, but I didn't expect her to come over early in the morning. After she was sure that I was dead, she swung her bag at Charlie. Charlie, you bastard, what did you say to Amy? She has already agreed to divorce you. Why don't you just live a good life with that bitch Jane? Why are you forcing Amy to death? Charlie still looked like he hadn't regained his sanity. It's impossible, she couldn't have committed suicide. She loved me so much, how could she commit suicide? I floated to the crystal chandelier that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and watched Charlie and Cindy quarreling. Cindy was indeed my last support in Charlie's family. After I died, she actually turned against Charlie. Cindy wanted to say something, but the police came over and asked her questions while holding Kevin's diary and photos. Mr. Charlie, are these your photos and diaries? Charlie and Cindy looked over at the same time and were both stunned. The boy in the photo is about 16 or 17 years old, wearing an ordinary high school uniform. Although he has the same face as Charlie, as a member of Charlie's family, I can still recognize at a glance that the person in the photo is not Charlie. No, it's not. Charlie's expression changed slightly. Charlie knew that he couldn't hide Kevin's affairs from the police, so he told them the truth. The police then said, a suicide note was found under Ms. Amy's body. Mr. Charlie, do you have a twin brother? Charlie nodded again and said, my suicide note contains every detail of my acquaintance with Kevin. At the end of my suicide note, I wrote, the person I love is gone, and I no longer have the heart to stay in this world. Charlie's eyes turned red after hearing this. How could that be? The person she likes should be me. Cindy, on the other hand, was stunned at first after hearing what the police said. She might have thought of what I said to her that night when I was drunk. She suddenly burst into laughter. I laughed, Charlie, Amy never liked you at all. The person she liked was Kevin. It's Kevin who is many times better than you. You deserve it, just go live with that bitch Jane. The days waiting for reincarnation were extremely difficult. Because after my body was taken to the morgue by the police, Charlie actually slept in the morgue like a pervert, and he called it accompanying me. I was very annoyed, so I went to Cindy in my dream and asked her to help me get rid of Charlie. After Cindy learned of my death, she cried for several days, then went out to find Charlie wearing sunglasses. Charlie must be staying in our wedding room in a depressed mood. He drew the curtains, plunging the room into darkness. Lying where I died, with an unshaven beard. Cindy pushed the door open and smelled a strong smell of cigarette smoke. She frowned. Who are you acting for now that the person is dead? When Amy was still alive, you humiliated her in every possible way. Are you going to make her a laughingstock in the entire city of A? Didn't you force her to divorce you because that bitch Jane was coming back? Why are you pretending? Charlie sat on the ground dejectedly, his eyes red. I didn't really want to divorce her. She has been with me for so many years, and even if I were a stone, I would have feelings for her. I didn't know about her affair with Kevin before, and I didn't know she mistook me for Kevin. I thought she was so good to me and liked me so much, and she had other intentions. It was not until now that I found out that the person she loved was Kevin. But have you ever thought that Amy needs love so much? Even if she mistook you for Kevin, she gave you everything. If you had been a little bit nicer to her during these 10 years, she wouldn't have committed suicide now. In her suicide note, she said that she no longer had any attachment to the world because you had treated her badly. Charlie raised his red eyes and looked at the wedding photo he had put together on the wall. Tears welled up in the corners of his eyes for a long time, and his suppressed crying could be heard in the darkness. On the 5th day after my death, Charlie would still stay with me at night and then go back to my room in the villa to get drunk during the day. He ignored the calls and text messages on his phone. But that day, his assistant found his home and said that Jane was found in the company. He looked unhappy, but still cleaned himself up and went to the company. I was curious and followed him. Jane was already waiting in his office, and when she saw Charlie she came up to him. Charlie, I messaged you saying I was at the airport, why didn't you come to pick me up? But Charlie pushed her away with a cold face. If you have something to say, just say it. Jane noticed Charlie's change in attitude towards her, so she asked cautiously, what happened? Amy doesn't agree with your divorce? Charlie sat down at his desk and rubbed his temple with a headache. Whether I divorce her or not seems to have nothing to do with you. Jane's expression changed slightly. Indeed, Charlie only said that when she returned to China, he would treat her well. But he didn't say he would marry her after the divorce. Jane wanted to say something, but Charlie said, don't come to the company to see me in the future. You were forced to go abroad by my mother. I settled you down after you came back. This is what I should do, but I don't want others to misunderstand that I still have any relationship with you. Jane now understood what Charlie meant, but she had already squandered all her money abroad. Just wait for Charlie to divorce his wife after he comes back, and then marry her and let her live the life of a rich wife. There's something wrong with Charlie's attitude now. So she spoke carefully. Did you discover something? Charlie frowned and looked at Jane, thinking that Jane was talking about Kevin, and said. Yes, I found out that I loved the wrong person. I settled you down after you came back. This is what I should do, but I don't want others to misunderstand that I still have any relationship with you. Jane now understood what Charlie meant, but she had already squandered all her money abroad. Just wait for Charlie to divorce his wife after he comes back, and then marry her and let her live the life of a rich wife. There's something wrong with Charlie's attitude now. So she spoke carefully. Did you discover something? Charlie frowned and looked at Jane, thinking that Jane was talking about Kevin, and said. Yes, I found out that I loved the wrong person. He smiled self-deprecatingly after he finished speaking, but Jane's expression changed drastically. Charlie, listen to my explanation. Although I did pretend to be Amy, I would help others if I saw them bullying kittens. Jane's words were completely different from what Charlie understood. Charlie looked up at her with cold eyes. What do you mean? Jane was stunned, but now she had already said it. If she kept it secret any longer, Charlie would find out. But I never take it seriously. Charlie, you liked me because you saw me saving a stray cat. But actually, the person you first met was not me, but Amy. That night, it was Amy who fought with 3 other cat abusers in the alley and saved the stray cat. I saw it, and later I overheard that you were attracted to the girl who saved stray cats. That's why I deliberately found someone to act out the scene of rescuing stray cats. Just a few words shocked Charlie and I. I was shocked because I was a loner at first and my only playmates were stray cats and dogs, so whenever I saw a stray cat in danger, I would go to rescue it. I didn't expect Charlie would be attracted to me because of this, and I didn't expect Charlie fell in love with Jane because of this. Charlie would be shocked, probably because I loved the wrong person and he also loved the wrong person. It's boring. In this world, everyone loves the wrong person. My funeral was held on the 7th day after my death, and that night, I sent a dream to Cindy. I told her. I am very happy to have her in Charlie's family, to accompany me through those dark years, and she does not have to feel guilty about my death. On the day of the funeral, Charlie also attended my funeral. Because I sold my shares and withdrew my investment in Charlie's family, he had to face my death while dealing with the company's troubles. In just 6 days, he looked much more haggard. At the funeral, a child grabbed his clothes and asked him, "Uncle, who died? You look very sad." Charlie's voice was slightly choked as he looked at my tombstone. It was my wife who died. I don't care anymore. I turned around and saw the messenger from the underworld who had come to pull me back was standing behind me. Amy, it's time for you to go. I smiled, okay. I don't feel sad. In another world, the boy I love would be a 7 or 8-year-old brother. In this life, I miss the summer with the noisy cicadas, and also miss the boy in my heart. In the next life, I will definitely catch the moon that belongs to me. Kevin, I'm here to find you.